Okay, so in this lesson, this webinar session, I'm going to share with you important concepts on the topic of reproduction in plants. Now, in P5, we learn about human and animal reproduction. At the same time, also, we learn about plant reproduction. There are some similarities and some differences between plant and human reproduction. Okay, and we are going to take a look at what are the concepts that you must know under the topic of plant reproduction. First, you must show an understanding that living things reproduce to ensure continuity of their own kind, and that many characteristics of an organism are passed on from parents to offspring. So we learn in another topic of cells, right? Now these characteristics are passed down, okay, in the nucleus, okay, which is in the cell, and it is passed on to the offspring. Okay, so you must be able to investigate the various ways in which plants reproduce and communicate the findings. Plants are reproduced either through seeds or through the spores, and recognize the different processes in the sexual reproduction of flowering plants: pollination, fertilization, seed dispersal, and finally germination. These are the 4 important processes that you need to know under this topic of plant reproduction. Now, first, we need to understand the parts or the reproductive parts of the plants. Okay, now the reproductive parts of the plants are largely the flowers. Okay, so you must know the parts of the flowers. Now, most flowers have both male and the female parts in the same flower, but in some plants, they have a separate male and female flowers. Okay, now sexual reproduction involves both male and female reproductive organs. So flowering plants have male and female reproductive parts, and these parts are found in the flowers. So you can see here the female parts consist of the stigma, the style, the ovary and the ovule, while the male parts consist of the anther and the filament. We will look at it more deeper in the next few slides. Now the female part. Of the flower are the stigma, style, ovary, and the ovules. Okay, and the female reproductive cells are found in the ovule. The ovule here is where you find the female reproductive cells. Now this stigma here, if you have purchased or done experiments on flower, you will notice that the stigma here is quite sticky. Okay, why is it sticky? Because it is later required in the process of pollination. And this is the style, and this is ovary. Ovary is the outer part here, and the inner part here is ovule, and inside the ovule, it consists of the female reproductive cells. Now, the male part. This is the male part. The male part consists of the anther and the filament. The anther and the filament. Now, inside this anther, there is this male reproductive cell. We call this pollen grains. It consists of the pollen grains in the anther. All right, so this is a close-up of the male parts of the flower. The anther contains pollen sacs, which contains the pollen grains. Okay, so you can see here. So the female reproductive cells are found in the pollen grains. Now the female parts here, both flowers have both male and female parts here. Right? And some flowers, the male and female parts are separate. So for example, this plant, papaya is one of the plants where the flowers, male and female flowers are different or separated. So you can see here the female flowers, it has the stigma here and the ovary inside here. The male flower, it has the anther and the pollen grain inside the anther here. Now, why are bees and butterfly often seen amongst flowers? How do bees help in plant reproduction? Okay, anyone? What is the purpose? Why do we see lots of butterflies and insects near flowers? Why? They will help in the process called pollination, not dispersal, in the process of pollination. Now, some students, they mix up the concepts of seed dispersal and pollination. Seed dispersal is different from pollination. Let's take a look. What is pollination? Now, pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther, which is the male part, to the stigma of the flower, which is the female part. Okay, from the anther male part to the stigma. This is the process of pollination, different from seed dispersal. So for reproduction to occur, pollination first must occur. Since flowers cannot move, they need to be able to attract pollinators or be built so that the wind is able to pollinate them. Okay, so they are pollinated in two ways. Number one, via insects or animals. Number two is via wind. Okay, wind can also assist in pollination. Flowers attract pollinators such as bees, butterfly, and birds with sweet nectar and bright colors. This is the function of the bright petals and the sweet nectar. Okay, the purpose is to attract insects and butterflies and animals to help them in pollination. Now, these are some of the examples of the animals that helps to pollinate the flowers. Insects, birds, and also by wind. Now, pollen grains can be transferred also within the same flower. This is called self-pollination. So you can see here, the pollen grains from the anther goes direct to the stigma of the same flower. We call this self-pollination. Right? And when the pollen grain goes from one flower to another, the stigma of another flower, we call this cross-pollination. Okay, we call this cross-pollination. Now, in this picture here, you can see that the pollen grains, okay, has been attached, okay, or stick onto the sticky stigma. All right. So we will see what happens next. Once the pollen grain goes to the stigma, and we can see what happens. And this is the table that tells you the difference in the type of flower between insect pollinated and wind pollinated flowers. So in insect pollinated flowers, the flowers are usually large, scented, that means nice smelling, and brightly colored, and nectar is present. Okay, nectar is present to attract the insect. The stamen and the stigma are hidden inside the flowers, and the stigma is sticky so that the pollen grains that land on it cannot be easily shaken off. And the pollen grains are larger and heavier with a rough surface for sticking into the insect's body, and the smaller number of pollen grains is produced. Now, for the flowers to be pollinated by wind, okay, usually the flowers are small and odorless. That means they are not scented, with dull colored petals, and nectar is absent. Stamen and stigma hanging out of the flowers. Now, what is the reason? So that when the pollen grains are carried by the wind, okay, it can reach the stigma easily. That's why it is hang out from the flowers. And the stigma is larger and feathery branches for catching the pollen grains, and it's not so sticky. The pollen grains are smaller, smoother, lighter, and easily blown by the wind. Okay, and usually a large number of pollen grains is produced. All right. Now, next process that we need to know is the process of fertilization. After pollination, okay, the next process is fertilization. So what happens to the pollen grain when it reaches the stigma? So when the pollen grain lands on the surface of the stigma, it produces a pollen tube. It produces a pollen tube. The inside of the tip of the tube contains the male reproductive cells of the flower. Okay, from the pollen grains, okay, it grows the pollen tube, and it goes in and reach the ovary and the ovule inside. Why? So that it can fuse with the female reproductive cell. So the inside of the tube contains the male reproductive cell of the flower, and the tube grows downwards through the style to reach the ovules in the ovary. And inside each ovule is an egg cell. Okay? Inside each ovule is an egg cell. Now, fertilization takes place when the male reproductive cells from the pollen grain fuses with the egg cell. Okay, so this was very important. Fuses. Okay, when the male reproductive cell fuses with the female reproductive cell, which is the egg. So after fertilization, what happens? Okay, so the flower petals wither and fall off. You can see here, the flowers and the petals will fall off. The ovary starts to swell. Okay, it starts to become bigger to form a fruit. So you imagine durian, how durian flower, okay, from the ovary of the durian flower, and it grows into such a massive and very, majestic fruit. So inside the ovary, the ovules begin to develop into the seeds. Okay, so ovary becomes the fruit. The ovary becomes the fruit, while the ovules becomes the seed. Right? So the seed continues to develop into the fruit, inside the fruit, and the fruit grows bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay, so you can see here, right, this process. Now, next process, after the fruit is developed, okay, it grows bigger. So the next process, we need to disperse the seeds. Okay, so why? Why do fruits and seeds have to be dispersed? It has to be scattered. What is the reason? Anyone? What will happen if the fruits and the seeds are not scattered? There will be over what? Overcrowding, right? Okay, when the seeds and the fruits are not well scattered or are not well dispersed, there will be overcrowding. So is there a problem with overcrowding? What will happen when there's overcrowding? Yes, what's the problem when there's overcrowding? Anyone? Competition, yes. Competition for what? Okay, competition for nutrients, food, light, space. Okay, so if fruits and seeds are not scattered away from the plants, the seed will grow too close to one another, leading to overcrowding. So when overcrowding occurs, young plants compete with one another for space, sunlight, water, and minerals, so leading to poor growth. Okay, now remember this, can you take this down on a piece of paper? Overcrowding occurs when the young plant compete with one another for four things: space, sunlight, water, and minerals or nutrients. Now, some of students say air. Air is abundant. So air, we wouldn't say that they need to compete for air because there's lots of air around the plants. But what will happen if they have to compete? Okay, when there is overcrowding, they will have to compete with each other for space, sunlight, water, and minerals, leading to poor growth. Okay, question. Now you take a look at these two pots of plants. Now thicker stems, taller, thinner stems. Anyone can tell me which one is overcrowded? Is it A or B? B is overcrowded, right? Now, when B is overcrowded, why is it that the stem cell is taller? Okay, the stem cell is taller than compared to A. Anyone? No space. Okay, to fight, yes. Okay, Dania, because they have to compete for sunlight, right? So when they have to compete for sunlight, they will try to outgrow each other. Okay, they try to outgrow each other and leading to thinner stems because they has to grow taller. So in the end, okay, they will not be able to grow well because of this overcrowding and competition for sunlight. All right. Okay. Now, what are the methods of seed dispersal? There are four methods that you need to know to reduce overcrowding. Number one, by wind, by water, explosive action or splitting, and the fourth one is via animals. Now, let's take a look at each of these examples. Now, if they are dispersed by wind, there are certain characteristics of the seed and the fruit. Usually the fruit has wing-like structure or helicopter-like structure. Okay, like you can see angsana here, like flying saucer. Shorer here like helicopter. Or dandelion, it is very light, okay, and it has a kind of wing-like structure here. It can spin and it can be dispersed very, very far. All right. Next, seed dispersal by water. Fruit dispersed by water usually float and are carried along rivers, stream, and the sea. So they often have fibrous husks that trap air or waterproof coverings to help them float. Example here, coconut, pong, okay, duun. All right. Next, by splitting or explosive action, some fruits split open when they are ripe. Now this shoots their seeds away. Like rubber tree, the fruit and the seeds, it is dispersed by explosive action. Now the fruit walls have lines of tension that pull and curl up the walls when ripe and dry. Okay. Next one, dispersal by animals. Now by animals, there are two ways by animals. One is when the fruit or the seeds are attached to the body of the animals, okay, or human clothes. Okay, and as the animal move around, the seeds will be dispersed to other location. Okay, it could also be that the fruits are eaten by animals, okay, and the animals, when they go to other places to spit the seeds, okay, or to poop. All right, the seeds are dispersed at other areas. Now these fruits are normally fleshy, juicy, and brightly colored. All right, because they must be attractive for the animals to eat them and to help them in the seed dispersal. Yes, thank you. Now big seeds are thrown away. Smaller seeds are usually swallowed and passed out in the animals dropping. The next process is germination. When the seeds land on suitable ground with favorable condition, they will germinate and grow. So what are the conditions for germination? Right? So what are the conditions? Now, basically germination is when the seed starts to grow. All right. Now, there are certain conditions before the seed can germinate. Number one, air or oxygen must be present. Number two, there must be water present. And the third one is warmth or suitable temperature, okay, before the seed can germinate. Now, we eat green bean soup, right? Now, this green bean, when we purchase from NTUC, you know that it doesn't germinate, right? But when the conditions are suitable, when you put this green bean seed on cotton wool and you pour water and you leave it for just a few hours, and within one day you can see that the seed will germinate. We have done this many times in school. All right. Now, question, during germination, why is the root the first to grow out of the seed? Anyone? Why is the root the first to grow out of the seed? Anyone? Sunlight to take in water. Yes, very good. Okay, one of the important things that the seed needs to have for it to continue to grow is to be able to absorb water. Right? Now, do you need sunlight for germination? Somebody was telling about sunlight. Right? Do we need sunlight for germination? No. Light is not required for germination. Take note, very important, because the seed contains seed leaf. Seed leaf inside the seed where it provides the food for the seeds to germinate until it can grow its own leaves. Okay. Now you can see here, germination, the roots grow out first of the seed, and during the seed, the seedlings cannot make its own food, but it gets its energy from the food stored in the seed leaves. Okay, so inside the seed, we have the seed leaves. And after that, the shoot starts to appear. So the shoot is the one which will grow into leaves. Okay, so the first leaf will unfold. So the young plant can start to make its own food. So you can see here the seed leaf will start to grow smaller and smaller as the seed germinates. So it will start to grow smaller and shrivel until it is completely used, the seed leaf. And then by that time, the shoot will have produced the first leaves, and then it can make its own food in the presence of sunlight. So the plant grows and bear flowers, and the seeds are dispersed, and you can see that the cycle will repeat itself. All right, and lastly, we know that there are some plants with no flowers, right? Example, ferns and some, and fungi. They have no flowers, right? So we call these non-flowering plants, such as ferns and fungi. And ferns reproduce from spores, which are mainly dispersed by wind. And spore bags contain spores, which can be found usually on the underside of the fern leaf. Right? Okay, let's summarize. We have discussed quite in detail the key processes or concepts under the topic of plant reproduction. Right? So firstly, we talk about the parts of the flowers, and then the first process, pollination. Right? Pollination is where the pollen grains are being transferred from the anther to the stigma. And then fertilization, okay, where the pollen grains, okay, the male reproductive cell in the pollen grains fuses with the female reproductive cells in the ovule, right? So after fertilization, okay, it will grow into fruit, and then after the fruit is grown, you need to disperse the seeds, right? Okay, in the process, several methods of seed dispersal. We learn it is dispersed by water, by animals, by wind, and by explosive action. And then after the seeds are dispersed to prevent overcrowding, and then for the seeds to grow, we call this process germination. Okay, and then after it germinates, again, the process continue again and again in a cycle. All right.